In this video, I'm going to go over the steps necessary to run hViewO. To begin, from our GitHub site, shown in the address bar there, this is where you can go to get the source code that goes for hViewO. In doing so, I'll talk about some of the prerequisites you'll need to understand about. First, you're going to need Git. That's going to be our source code control server, so you're going to need Git to go get our source code. Additionally, you're going to need some kind of IDE to make changes. You'll either need NetBeans or Eclipse, kind of assumed there. You'll need the JDK. If you want to have some plugins to work with Gwt, you'll need those as well. So to begin, you can just grab the GitHub address, and if we were to just open up a browser and git clone and then pump in that address, you could download the source code. So I'm not gonna have you watch downloading the source code. So here's the repository as it's downloaded from the system. So the target folder is actually produced during the build process, so that won't be there when you do your initial download. But a couple of things that I can show you within the source tree. So hViewO fork, that's the actual server that we're going to be running, so we'll launch that in a couple of minutes so we can take a look at what happens when you run the server. Also, there's a sample file there, so you can load that into the server, so that way you can have some data to work against. Beyond that, we have a source folder, that's where the actual source code is, a test folder, that's where all the unit tests are located, and then a war, which is the repository which holds the HTML, the CSS, and the other things that are the basic HTML components of the application. We also have some libraries that we maintain, samples for some of the things that we were working on during the development of the system, and then some documentation and some other we've got a personas folder. So that's the stuff that we worked on during the process. In the main folder, what we have is we have our actual build files, so that we can open up NetBeans. So I'm going to do that now. I'll open up NetBeans, and this is the primary IDE that I've used throughout the process. So this is what I'm comfortable with using. As I said earlier, you might go with Eclipse. We have some people that do it purely command line, so whatever your favorite flavor is. So one of the things to keep in mind, that when you're working with hViewO, it is a web application, so you're going to have to host it somehow. So what I'll show is that in my application, what I can take a look at is, if I look at properties for the project, what I'll see is that in the run component, I actually reference Apache Tomcat. So you're going to have to host this with some sort of web server. So Tomcat is the preferred server. I remember running into some problems running with Glassfish. So if you're running NetBeans or Eclipse, Apache Tomcat is the preferred server for this application. So once you have this application downloaded and opened up in NetBeans, I'm just going to go ahead and debug it. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up the server. So the server is what we saw here in this hViewO fork. So I'm just going to grab this address here. I'm going to change over to that folder. And this is the application actually produced by Hex Data. So this is the we have a custom fork of it with a little bit of changes, but primarily this is the same application that you'll get from them. So I'm just gonna launch this jar, h2o.jar. So this is what you'll go to, that hViewO fork directory. You'll launch the jar. This will open up a new web session, and at that point you should be able to connect to that session on your local system. So if I go localhost 54321, that's the default web address, and that's actually the web address that we connect to. So if you look at the design document, you'll notice that you have to connect to 54321. If you want to do a different port, you're going to have to change up the application a little bit. So once I have the server running, I want to import some files. So I go to the request import files page, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in this CSV that's built into the project. So this is something that we've included, so that way you can go run through this demo. So if I just dump in that CSV file, submit that, and then import it, I'll see some statistics based on the data that's contained therein. If you're going through an actual process, these statistics may help you identify which fields are important. So if you see a large range on a field, maybe that would be a less important field. So now that the server's up and running, this is actually hosting this data set for me. So at this point, I can go ahead and launch the hViewO application, and then I'll be able to bind to that data set and start to create models based on the parameters we pass in. So again, if you're not really familiar with the application, what we're doing is we're working with random forest algorithm. And what the random forest algorithm does is it takes the data set row by row, column by column, and randomly selects pieces of the puzzle and builds decision trees from those pieces. So what it'll do is it'll go through all the different columns and it'll pick a column by random, and then what it'll do is it'll build a decision tree based on the rest of the data set. So it'll selectively pick individual rows from the data set, and it'll build a decision tree such that starting from the column that was selected, it'll build a decision tree that routes down to the column that we're interested in. That's referred to as the classification variable. So what you can do is iterate through this large data set with a number of trees, and then the number of based on say you produce 1,000 trees based on this random selection, you'll produce a forest, and that's why it's called random forest. And then the majority wins. So if five out of 6 trees in the forest vote for a specific classification on the feature that you're working on, that will be the determination. So now that we've got this open, we've imported our data set. This is the hViewO basic user interface. So we can pick that cars hex that we imported. And now what we're going to see is we're going to see some basic statistics, or actually this is the actual data from the data set. And what we're going to do is we're going to say generate for us. So at this point, this will bring up our dialog, and we can pick which our classification or response variable is the same thing, which we want to filter off of. This is essentially saying what do we want to classify upon. So if we want to be able to make sure that we can always determine, given another sample, how many cylinders are in a vehicle or what color. So I'll just go with color, and I'll go with the default of 50 trees. Additionally, based on this statistics we saw earlier, I could have ignored a column if I identified that it's not really that important. And then also we have these advanced variables, so that way we can say that one class is more important than another. So if we weren't really worried about a red car, we could reduce the weight of that specific classification. So I'm going to go ahead and generate a model, and this produce the random forest for me, building 50 trees within that forest. So again, I went back to the example earlier. Majority wins. So if 26 out of 50 trees agree that the car is blue, then that's the determination. So with the classification variable I selected, color, it's very difficult to predict on that classification variable. So what you'll see is we have a very high classification error, in this case 73%. So if we went back and did it with cylinders, it would be a little bit lower. So this is the basic workflow of the application. What we can see is we saw the number of trees, we saw how many are used, the classification error. So this data can be used as a feedback mechanism so that you can go back and produce another forest. Additionally, what you have is the ability to go ahead and look at the individual trees. So if I wanted to look at a tree, I could zoom in on this tree and see how it works through. Based on the number of branches in this tree, it's very difficult to look at it. If you had a smaller tree, you'd have a better idea of what it looks like. Given that large tree, what you'd be able to do is, since we've split this so that you can see the data and the tree on the same side, you can actually just pop this out, so that way you can see this tree full screen and zoom in on it if you wish to. So that's about the basics of it. I think the most complicated part is just getting the server up and running, so I demonstrated that. So what we see is the server's running here in this web browser. I'm hosting our application in Tomcat via NetBeans, which is providing the host. So that's the basics of it. A couple different variants. You can run this from Eclipse. Git, of course, is our standard. So I think I've given enough of a description about the source tree. Again, your final target will be in this folder. So we see this snapshot. So there's our source code, our HTML. There's our styles. The styles can be modified. If we pull back up, what else can we take a look at? So the source tree, drill down through edu, hViewO, CS. There's the client part, the server part, the shared part. Basic stuff that you're going to find in most Java applications. So that about wraps it up. I think this is a sufficient demonstration. What we'll also provide is a very quick summary within the deployment documentation. But if you need to just get it up and running really quick, I think this video will help simplify the kind of documentation that we'd have to write to kind of represent this process. So enjoy. Thank you.